So Randy Mullins asked me to speak today, and I asked him, well, what do you want me to talk about? And he said, I'm sure that God will give you something, or something to that effect. And so from that moment, I began praying, God, what do you want me to share today? Because there are a million different directions that we can go. And when God laid on my heart why I truly am passionate about our new children's building, I said no. And I argued with the Lord for about 3 weeks. And you know how that ends up. So here we are. So if you don't mind, I'm going to pray first, because the weight of what I'm going to talk to you about is not lost upon me. And I truly want this to be about the Lord and about our church. Okay. Lord, I thank you so much for trusting me with this story. I thank you for the hands that have been in it, the changes that you have created, and the glory that it gives to you and will continue to give to you as the church serves your purpose. In Christ's name, amen. So I know that we are all aware that we are in a constant state of spiritual warfare. Okay? We know that the world is not a beautiful place all the time. And we know that we are blessed to have this space where we can be safe and where we can feel loved. So what I'm going to share with you today is the story of a young man and the church that quite literally saved his life in every way possible. This young man was born to a mother who had been in and out of jail, struggled with addiction for pretty much the entirety of her life. And unfortunately, when that child was born, that did not change. His father was an illegal immigrant who was an evil, evil man. A bad, bad man. Evil man. And sometimes for us, in our homes and with our family, it is hard to imagine that kind of person. This is why we changed the order of service a little bit, because I wanted the littles to be gone while we talked about this. So, when this child was about 3 days old, he was taken by DCS custody from his mom and his dad, and he was placed with his grandparents. At about 3 months of age, he was taken back to his mom and his dad. At a 6-month welfare checkup by DCS, they found the child was not gaining weight. He had bruises. He had lots of terrible, awful things that no child should exhibit. And at 6 months, he was taken back to his grandparents' house. He lived with his grandparents from the age of 6 months until about 2 years of age, at which point, because the way that the law works in the state of Tennessee and, just federal law anyway, they try to reunite families if at all possible, okay? And there are several opinions about that, but that's just the way it works. And a lot of times it works out beautifully, and a lot of times it doesn't. So from the ages of 2 until about 5, this child lived in constant abuse and neglect and starvation. He and his family were often on the run. He was shoved into closets and shoved into bathrooms in order to escape DCS, because it was a constant presence in their home from the time he was born. At the age of 5, he witnessed his father take a life, very brutally. There were lots of other things that this child saw that no adult should ever see. And it breaks my heart to even think about that. When I look at my boys, I can't imagine allowing them to be in a situation like that. I would give my life to save them from that. So at the age of 5, his father was deported for violent crimes, for rape and for murder. And he was taken back to his grandparents' house. At that point, his mother kind of went on the run and disappeared for 2 years. They did not hear from her. They did not see her. The kids were, by all rights, abandoned by her. And unfortunately, that's a wound that cuts deeper than most. If you think about your mama, how many of you out there had a really great mama? How many of you try to be a great mama? Okay. So if you can think about leaving your children without a trace and knowing how that would hurt them, this is the wound that this child carried, okay? At the age of 7, mom comes back into the picture with a new husband. From the outside looking in for the first several months, this situation actually looks pretty good. Mom has a job. She is not using. Stepdad does all of the things that dads theoretically are supposed to do. He works, he brings a check home, he takes care of the family, he takes them to the movies, they go to the park, they have all these wonderful times together, they spend time as a family. But what nobody else sees is when they're behind closed doors, the scene is completely different. So one story that this young man asked for me to share with you, and this isn't the worst, so I'm not going to get into as much detail as what we've been trusted with, but just one instance alone. This child remembers coming home from school and there was no food in the house. And he ate at school as much as possible because he never knew when he was going to have food. It was the weekend, and he was starving. So his mom said, well, there's some milk in there. Get just a little so that your stepdad doesn't know that you took a drink of his milk. And so he does. And he goes to bed, and he sleeps on a top bunk in a hotel because that's where they lived at the time. And sometime during the night, his stepdad returned home and realized that the child had gotten some milk. So from a dead sleep, this child is dragged out of his top bunk by the ankles to the floor with his head and his ribs scraping across the bunk bed, slamming onto the floor, and is beaten and beaten and beaten and kicked. Ribs are broken, bruises are everywhere, face and head are bleeding. It's terrible. This is one instance from the age of 7 to the age of about 13. The other that I know about personally, I cannot share on this stage because they are too terrible and gruesome and nasty, and I will not do that to you. It makes me so upset that I'm shaking because I cannot imagine someone doing that to a child. The worst part about it was that during the occasions that some of these things were happening, his mom would laugh and tell him that he deserved it. He needed to grow up and be a man. So the one person who should have loved him more than anybody else egged it on, sometimes even set up instances where this would happen because she thought it was funny. As a parent, I cannot imagine. I would put myself in harm's way 1,000,000 times over again to protect my child from one instance of this, let alone 7 years, 6 years. Okay? So, you have a child, he's brought up in a home, language is vulgar, lots of inappropriate content, things that we shouldn't watch as adults are on television constantly. Drugs, alcohol, guns, you name it, it's there, okay? Then you put him in school where he doesn't know that those things aren't normal. And he gets labeled as a bad kid. And so he starts to believe it. And he acts on that. And he gets in trouble constantly. And the more he gets in trouble, the more it reinforces the fact that he's just a bad kid. The more he knows that his life is going to end up in jail, at best. Okay? So, this is where our story kind of turns. And so, Eric, if you'll show the first picture, please. That is the earliest picture that we have of Jonathan. So he's not here today. He asked me to share his story. And he's wanted to thank this church for years and just hasn't been able to muster it up yet. But when God started dealing with me about sharing this, it took me 3 weeks to go ask this child if I could talk about it, because it is not what I wanted to do. And without hesitation, the first thing that came out of his mouth is, if it will point someone else to Christ, share my story. So if you want to go on to the next one. So this is Mama and Papa and his stepbrother Jamar. When he was 13, his stepdad beat him so violently and was about to go after his little brother that Jonathan flipped his stepdad over and beat the snot out of him to save his little brother. And then was taken back to Mama and Papa's. And Mama and Papa did the best they could, but they are from a very lower socioeconomic status. And so even with them, he still didn't have food. He didn't sleep much because it was his job to stoke the fire, to keep everybody else warm. And if you don't know where your next meal is coming from, or if it's coming, or when it's coming, it is really hard to pay attention in school. And it is really hard to change your behavior. And it's really hard to know what normal looks like. Right? So the first time I met him, go ahead, Eric, was at a youth party at our home. So this is the incredible grace of the Lord, because this, number one, this child should have been dead multiple times over. But our youth pastor at the time gave a charge to the kids and said, we want you to invite the one child at your school that needs Jesus the most. And 3 people invited Jonathan to this church. I see one of them here, at least. And they know who they are, because he's thanked them multiple times too. So on a Wednesday morning, Jonathan goes to school and 3 people invite him to First Baptist Church. Now, they go to school in Parrotsville. It's about a 20-minute drive from here or so, okay? Down the big highway. It's, it is where it is there. And he thought, got nothing else better to do. Guess I'll just go to church. They said they have food. So that Wednesday afternoon after school, he began to walk from Parrotsville and hitchhiked part of the way, and then walked a little further and sat downtown in Newport on the benches until it was time for church. And luckily, Regina, I don't see her here today, I really hoped she'd be here, found out that he had walked and took him back home. So, other things that you should know about Jonathan, go ahead and click to the next picture. I blew this one up. I don't know if you guys can see him. And he actually picked these pictures out for specific purposes, okay? So a couple of things I want you to notice about this picture. He and I have talked about this multiple times since he's been in our home. He never had clothes that fit, that were new, that were clean most of the time, okay? His shoes were always given to him by a teacher or a counselor at school. And he wore what he could. The biggest thing I want you to look at, though, is I want you to look at his face. I want you to look at his eyes, and I want you to see the emptiness and the brokenness of a 13-year-old child who had no hope. He always kept a knife in his pocket for protection. And that's something we've had to break over the last year and a half. Because theoretically, you're not supposed to have them on school property. He said, you know what's weird about this? We talked about this picture yesterday morning. He said, you know what's weird about this? I was happy that day. Because I was there. He said, but I still look miserable. I still look pitiful. And I said, I know, buddy, you do. But this church became the one thing in his life that he looked forward to every week. His friends, I see two of you that were pivotal in this now. I see both of you. His friends were the reason he kept going, because there were a lot of times where he didn't want to. If you want to flip to the next picture, that's him in our old sanctuary. I did cut out the picture of his sister because this story is his. But he wanted me to add this. He said, look at my clothes. And the important part about that is that regardless of how he looked, regardless of how socially awkward he acted, this church loved him deeply and opened him with a love that can only be explained as the love of Christ. This was his safe place. This was his haven. This is where he got a lot of food on Wednesday nights. And so he also wanted me to thank all the ladies that serve, because you gave him extra, even when he ate too much. Okay, go ahead to the next one. This is his 8th grade graduation. Aside from his grandmother, who Regina went to pick up to make sure she was there, the only people who went for this child were from this church. And he was so upset because his other family didn't come. But he told me about a year ago, I cried that night because nobody else came, one person in specific. He said, but I've realized over the last 3 or 4 months that my family was already there. I just didn't know it yet. Okay, go ahead, Eric. This was the pivotal moment for this kiddo. He accepted Christ into his heart. He called Becca Fisher from behind the shed at his mama's house, panicking. And he asked to be baptized. And we all know that when you accept Christ and when you're baptized, you're not perfect. But I'm going to tell you the change that we saw in this kid, in his heart, in his direction, can only give glory to the Lord. This was, I can't remember what year this was, but I look back on it now, and there are 3 people, well, 4 if you count the Lord, but there are 3 people in that tub right there. Pastor Rich, Jonathan, and the one person he asked to stand behind him, which was Derek. And we did not know at that time that he would later become one of our kiddos. And so I look back at this picture and I'm overwhelmed. Go ahead, Eric. This is right after he was baptized. Go ahead. This was another Sunday. It's just, I'm showing you these pictures because I want you to remember that first one by the fire pit. Because I want you to see the change in him throughout the years of being invested in this church and us investing in him. Wade talked about investing in our church family. This is what you're doing when you give for this kids program and these kids ministries. This is what you're doing. You are breaking generational curses. You are winning souls. You are quite literally saving people. Go ahead and flip through, Eric. He is a natural protector. And Travis Hall can attest to this. Because of what this kid has seen and been through, he would put himself in harm's way without a second thought for anyone in this building. Without a second thought. And Travis, do you mind if I share what you told me a long time ago about your kiddos? So Travis and I were talking through, this was right before it became imperative for him to leave the situation he was in. That picture was taken right before we had to make the decision to bring him home with us. It's a very special picture. It was not even in our radar at the time, and it's Jonathan's favorite picture, which is pretty cool. But Travis and I were talking about some of the struggles that we were having at home, and Jonathan is okay with me talking about this too. But Travis always told me, he told me that morning, he said, he said, if there was ever an emergency in our school or a threat or a school shooter, he said, I would find my kids and I would give them to Zamora. Because I know, without a shadow of a doubt, that he would be the one person in this school, aside from myself and the SRO officer, that would keep them safe. And that speaks volumes to the integrity and the character of this kid and what God is doing in his life and just the person that he was anyway, and God has kind of helped to bring out. So the last picture with his cadet uniform on was because he actually had never made above a what, like a D at school? Maybe. We'd had him in our home for about 6 months or so, and I will tell you, it was a struggle. But this kid wrote his very first full essay because it was required and we wouldn't let him not do it. It took 3 nights. It took a lot of yelling. It took me standing over him, holding his hands over the keyboard while he got really mad at me. He won the essay competition for the state of Tennessee. And that is what God can do when people in a church invest in the kids. Go ahead, Eric. He loves to be a leader in this church. And when I was joking with him yesterday morning, we were talking about this, sort of joking with him. I told him, he said, did you guys know what I had been through when you took me home? And I said, no. I said, we all knew you were hungry, because that was obvious on Wednesday nights. We knew that you were a little dirty, that your clothes didn't fit. We knew that you were a little socially awkward and inappropriate. He says, well, I'm still that. And I was like, you are, but you have moments where you're not. But it's amazing to me because whatever you give him expectation-wise, he will strive to meet that every time because he does not want to disappoint the church family that saved his life. Okay, go ahead, Eric. This was the last Sunday that Austin was here. I can't tell you the pivotal role he had in Jonathan's life, but the story I want to share with this too is one of the things that he and I have talked about multiple times, and Derek and he have talked about multiple times over the course of having him in our home, is that God can use anything for his glory, even the situations that he came from, and that Jonathan will be able to reach people and places that none of us can. Justin Doobie talked about this a little bit with his testimony. Because of where he's been, he can reach people that I could never go talk to. And right before this Sunday, they had gone to a Fuge camp. Was it Fuge? a huge camp. And they were split off into groups because our church was on the evangelism tract. Jonathan, number one, was not comfortable talking about the Lord, like to people really at that point. Now he is. But also, there are certain male figures who still kind of trigger him and give him some trauma because of what's happened to him in his past. They were at a coffee shop, wherever they were doing their evangelism, and Austin called to tell me this. And one of our other youth went up to this gentleman who was drinking a black coffee. He was dirty, he's probably homeless, and this guy stands up and starts cussing at the other youth person. Without thinking even, basically, Jonathan gets up and puts himself between them and said, "Hey man, listen, I get it. I understand. I've come from a really hard place." And Jonathan started sharing his testimony and his story with this man who was probably in his 40s or 50s, who was just angry. And Jonathan said, "I know what it's like to be angry." He said, "But I'm angry because I'm afraid. If you have Jesus, you don't have to be afraid like that anymore, man. And just because you accept Christ doesn't mean your bill's going to get paid, but you know he's going to take care of you regardless." And the man sat down and had a conversation with Austin because Jonathan intervened. If you don't tell me that that's not God working, I don't know what is. Go ahead, Eric. I put this in here. He wanted me to put this in here because it's Mr. Brett, and he loves Mr. Brett. But this is when he got his insurance for his car. But I want you to look at the joy in his face. But that family had been pivotal for him throughout the years. And he said, "You have to include that because Mr. Brett's a part of my church family. And I was terrified of going to get insurance because I didn't know what we were doing. But Mr. Brett was there, and I know he loves me, so it was okay." And Brett could tell you he was like a little 2-year-old in there hopping up and down. It was hilarious. Go ahead. This was the beginning of this school year. This is our obligatory first day of school picture. And I wish that we could zoom into that, but I want you to look at his face. And I want you to remember that this is not what we have done. We just get to have a front seat to watch what God is doing. But this is what this church has done. This is what this kids program has done. This is what our youth have done. Go ahead and go to the last one, Eric. This is his other favorite picture. This was from Easter last year. Because of this church, because of its emphasis on children, because of the activities that we have that allow our kids to invite their friends to something that is worthwhile for them, generational curses are broken. And no, it's not perfect. And no, it's not easy. But when we have this building and the gym and the spaces, there are hundreds, if not thousands, of kids in this county who are living like they are in a third world country. But this is what we can do as a church through the programs that we have now and will have more later. So when May 4th rolls around, this is one of the things I want you to think about. I want you to look at this child and know that he is saved by grace because of the obedience of a faithful and truly Christ-loving church. Thank you, guys.